The blood-red sun sank below the dusty horizon as Nora Jenkins tugged desperately at the chains binding her wrists, the cold metal cutting deeper with each futile attempt at freedom. She couldn't believe how quickly her life had unraveled from a schoolteacher in Boston to a woman being auctioned off to cover her late father's debts in the untamed Arizona territory of 1878. "Please," she begged the gruff man who stood guard outside the makeshift holding pen behind Tuckson's seediest saloon. "There must be some arrangement we can come to. I'm educated. I can work as a teacher, a seamstress, anything. I'll pay back every cent." The guard, a burly man with tobacco-stained teeth, laughed. "Sorry, miss, your pa's debts are mighty steep. Mr. Holloway's set on selling your contract to the highest bidder tomorrow. Only way out is cold, hard cash $500. Nora's heart sank. $500 might as well have been 5,000. She'd arrived in Tucson with barely $20 to her name, responding to the letter about her father's death only to discover he'd gambled away everything and left creditors hounding for payment. "That's highway robbery," she protested, her voice cracking. "No debt contract is worth that much." "It is when the debtor's daughter looks like you," the guard said with a lecherous grin that made her skin crawl. "Pretty Eastern ladies fetch a premium out here. Some mine owner or cattle baron will pay handsomely for a refined woman like yourself." A debt contract wasn't technically slavery, but Nora knew the distinction meant little in practice. Women sold to cover debts in these territories often disappeared entirely, trapped in remote homesteads or mining camps with no way to escape their employers. "Let me speak with Mr. Holloway directly," she pleaded. "I'm sure we can, lady. You ain't the first to try bargaining." "Won't be the last," the guard cut her off, turning away. "Get some sleep. Auction's at noon tomorrow." As darkness fell completely, Nora huddled against the rough wooden wall of the pen, trying to ignore the sounds of raucous laughter and piano music from the saloon. Her education, her dreams of independence, all of it meant nothing now. Her father had sold her future as surely as if he'd signed the papers himself. Tears streaked down her dust-covered face. She'd been in Tucson less than 3 days, and already she'd lost everything. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the courage that had brought her across the country alone after her mother's death last year. The soft crunch of boots on gravel made her eyes snap open. A tall silhouette approached through the darkness, and Nora instinctively pressed herself further against the wall. "Evening," came a low, measured voice. "Heard there was a lady in some trouble back here." As he stepped closer, moonlight revealed a man unlike the rough miners and cowboys who populated most of Tucson. He wore a long duster coat over plain clothes, with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His face was weathered but clean-shaven, and his eyes, intense and assessing, studied her with unexpected gentleness. "Unless you've got $500, I doubt you can help me," Nora replied, straightening her spine despite her fear. "Quincy Reed," he said, ignoring her comment and tipping his hat slightly. "Most folks call me Quinn. Nora Jenkins. Most folks called me Miss Jenkins before I ended up in chains." A slight smile crossed his face. "Still Miss Jenkins to me, madam. Mind telling me how a proper Eastern lady found herself in such circumstances?" Something about his calm demeanor made Nora want to trust him, though she'd quickly learned trust was a luxury in this lawless place. "My father died," she said simply. "I came to settle his affairs only to discover his affairs were unsettleable. Mr. Holloway claims he owes $500 in gambling debts." Quinn's expression darkened. "Holloway's known for inflating debts after a man's passed. Did you see any proof of the amount?" "No. Just his word against that of a dead man and his daughter." Quinn leaned against the post of the pen, thinking, 500 steep even for Holloway. "I've offered to work to pay it off properly, but he refused, says an auction will settle it faster." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "I reckon it would," Quinn agreed quietly. "And there are men in these parts who'd pay twice that for a lady with your refinement." Nora felt sick. "So I've been told." Quinn studied her for a long moment. "When's this auction?" "Noon tomorrow." Though I doubt it will be a proper auction, more like a private sale to whichever of Mr. Holloway's associates offers the most. I see, he straightened up. Try to rest, Miss Jenkins. Things might look different by morning. Wait, Nora called as he turned to leave. Why did you come here? How did you even know about me? Quinn paused, his face half hidden in shadow. Let's just say I make it my business to know when Holloway's up to his old tricks. Good night, Miss Jenkins. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving Nora with a strange mixture of hope and apprehension. She didn't know who Quinn Reed was or what interest he had in her situation, but he was the first person who'd spoken to her with respect since she'd arrived in Tucson. Sleep came fitfully that night, broken by nightmares of being sold to faceless men who carried her away from civilization forever. When dawn broke, Nora was already awake, watching the sun paint the desert landscape gold. The guard brought her a tin cup of water and a hard biscuit. Your last meal as a free woman, he joked cruelly. Better enjoy it. Nora ignored him, focusing instead on the growing activity in the street. Tucson was coming alive, merchants opening their shops, women hanging laundry, children darting between buildings on mysterious errands. Normal life continuing while hers hung in the balance. By mid-morning, well-dressed men began filtering into the saloon. Nora recognized a few from around town, a silver mine owner from nearby, the banker who'd refused to help her when she'd first arrived, the owner of the largest general store. Respectable citizens coming to participate in the very unrespectable business of buying a human being. At 11:30, Holloway himself came to the pen. He was a portly man with a florid face and expensive clothes that marked him as prosperous even in this frontier town. Time to make yourself presentable, Miss Jenkins, he said, unlocking the pen. Can't have merchandise looking too shabby. I am not merchandise, Nora said through gritted teeth. Holloway smiled thinly. Your father made you such when he borrowed money he couldn't repay. Now come along quietly or I'll have my men drag you. With no choice, Nora allowed herself to be led to a small back room of the saloon where a basin of water and a hairbrush awaited. A bored-looking saloon girl was assigned to help her clean up. You're lucky, the girl said as she roughly brushed Nora's tangled hair. Most girls don't get the fancy treatment before Holloway sells them off. Lucky isn't the word I'd use, Nora replied, washing the dirt from her face. 20 minutes later, face clean and hair pinned back, Nora was marched into the main room of the saloon. The regular patrons had been cleared out, replaced by about 15 men seated at tables. They fell silent as she entered, eyes raking over her with undisguised interest. Holloway guided her to a small platform at the front of the room. Gentlemen, as promised, the matter of settling Jeremiah Jenkins' outstanding debts. His daughter, fresh from Boston, educated and refined, a true lady to grace any household. Nora scanned the room desperately, looking for Quinn among the faces, but he was nowhere to be seen. Her last flicker of hope died. Whatever his interest had been last night, it clearly hadn't extended to actually helping her. We'll start the bidding at $300, Holloway announced. Remember, you're bidding on a 5-year labor contract, all legal and proper. A silver-haired man in an expensive suit raised his hand. 300, 350, called the banker. Nora felt dizzy as the numbers climbed, men bidding on her as if she were a prized mare. 400, 450, 500, came a voice from the back of the room. The crowd parted slightly, and there stood Quinn Reed, hat in hand, expression unreadable. 550, countered the silver-haired man, looking annoyed at the interruption. 600, Quinn said calmly. The room murmured. Holloway looked delighted at the unexpected bidding war. 650, the silver-haired man said, his jaw tight. Quinn didn't hesitate. 700. The silver-haired man conferred briefly with a companion, then shook his head in defeat. 700 going once, Holloway called, barely containing his glee. Twice. $1,000, came a new voice. A man stepped forward from near the bar, tall, expensively dressed, with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. Cash, right now. Nora recognized him with horror. Nicholas Blackwood, owner of the largest cattle operation in the territory. Rumors about his treatment of workers, particularly women, had reached her ears even in her short time in Tucson. Holloway's eyes widened at the amount. Mr. Blackwood, a generous offer indeed. Quinn's face remained impassive. 1,200. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. You don't have that kind of money, Reed. Try me, Quinn replied, his voice deadly quiet. The tension in the room was palpable as the two men stared each other down. Finally, Blackwood sneered. 1,400. Quinn didn't blink. 1,500. A hush fell over the crowd. That was 3 times the original debt, an astronomical sum in the territory. Blackwood studied Quinn for a long moment, then abruptly laughed. She's not worth it. You'll regret overpaying when the novelty wears off. He tipped his hat mockingly to Nora. Good day, Miss Jenkins. Enjoy your new master. With that, he strode from the saloon, his companions following quickly behind. $1,500, Holloway announced, barely concealing his shock. Sold to Mr. Reed. Quinn approached the platform, reaching into his coat to produce a leather pouch. Count it if you like, he told Holloway. It's all there. While Holloway greedily counted the money, Quinn turned to Nora. Are you all right, Miss Jenkins? She stared at him in disbelief. You just paid $1,500 for a stranger. I paid $1,500 to keep you away from Blackwood, he corrected quietly. There's a difference. Holloway finished counting and handed Quinn a folded document. The labor contract, all legal and proper. She's yours for 5 years, Mr. Reed. Use her well. He winked suggestively. Quinn's jaw tightened, but he simply took the paper and offered his arm to Nora. Shall we, Miss Jenkins? In a daze, Nora took his arm and allowed him to lead her from the saloon. Outside, the bright sunlight made her blink. A few curious onlookers watched as Quinn led her down the main street toward a modestly appointed wagon hitched to 2 strong horses. Where are you taking me? She finally managed to ask. Quinn stopped beside the wagon and turned to face her. That depends entirely on you, Miss Jenkins. Before she could question him further, he unfolded the contract Holloway had given him and without ceremony tore it in half. What are you doing? Nora gasped. Setting things right, Quinn said simply, tearing the paper into smaller pieces and letting them scatter in the dusty street. You're free, Miss Jenkins. No contract, no debt. You can go wherever you please. Nora stared at the torn scraps of paper, then at Quinn's face, searching for some hint of deception. I don't understand. You just paid $1,500. I did, he agreed. Why would you do that for a stranger? Quinn's eyes softened slightly. Let's just say I've seen too many good people caught in Holloway's web, and I had the means to do something about it this time, but $1,500 is just money, he shrugged. I've had a few profitable years. Nora looked around the busy street, reality setting in. I'm free, she whispered. Completely, Quinn confirmed. Though if I might make a suggestion, putting some distance between yourself and Tucson might be wise. Holloway won't take kindly to losing his prize, and Blackwood is not a man who forgets a slight. The truth of his words hit her hard. She was free but utterly alone in a dangerous territory, with no money, no connections, and now powerful enemies. I have nowhere to go, she admitted. Quinn nodded as if he'd expected this. I own a small ranch about 20 miles north of here. It's nothing fancy, but I've got a spare room in the main house. You'd be welcome to stay until you figure out your next steps. Nora hesitated, studying him. In Boston, the very idea of staying alone with a strange man would have been unthinkable. But this was the Arizona territory, and conventional rules seemed far away. Besides, this man had just spent a fortune to free her without asking anything in return. Why would you help me further? She asked directly. Because it's the right thing to do, he answered simply. And because I know what it's like to be alone with nowhere to turn. Something in his eyes, a flash of old pain, quickly hidden, convinced her more than his words. Then I accept your offer, Mr. Reed, gratefully. Quinn nodded once, then helped her into the wagon. As they pulled away from Tucson, Nora felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. She was leaving behind the immediate danger, but heading into complete uncertainty with a man she'd met just hours ago. The journey north took them through rugged desert landscape, saguaro cacti standing like sentinels against the vast blue sky. Quinn was mostly quiet, occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming plants and animals they passed. His knowledge of the territory was extensive and his quiet confidence reassuring. By late afternoon, they crested a small rise and Quinn pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is," he said, gesturing ahead. "Welcome to Solace Creek Ranch." Below them stretched a modest but well-maintained property. A simple two-story house stood surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed. A small creek actually running with water, a rarity in this landscape, cut across one corner of the property, lined with cottonwood trees. "It's beautiful," Nora said honestly. Quinn's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "It's home." As they approached, two men emerged from one of the outbuildings, one older with graying hair, one younger with a friendly, open face. "These are my ranch hands," Quinn explained. "Samuel's been with me since I bought the place 7 years ago. Miguel joined us last spring. Good men, both of them." The men greeted Quinn with respectful nods, eyeing Nora with undisguised curiosity. "Samuel, Miguel, this is Miss Nora Jenkins," Quinn introduced her. "She'll be staying with us for a while as our guest." If the men were surprised, they hid it well, tipping their hats politely. "The spare room ready?" Quinn asked Samuel. "Yes, sir. Rosa came by yesterday to clean, fresh linens and everything." "Good. Miss Jenkins has had a trying few days. I'm sure she'd appreciate some rest." Samuel nodded. "Rosa left some stew simmering for supper. Should be ready whenever you are." Quinn helped Nora down from the wagon and led her to the house. It was simple but clean and well kept, a far cry from her Boston home, but comfortable nonetheless. The main floor consisted of a kitchen, dining area, and sitting room with a stone fireplace. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms, one of which would be hers. "It's not fancy," Quinn said, showing her to the spare room, "but it's private and safe." The room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a small table with a washbasin, and a window overlooking the creek. "It's perfect," Nora assured him. "I don't know how to thank you enough for everything." "No need for thanks. Get some rest. Supper will be ready in about an hour, but don't feel obligated to join us if you're too tired." Left alone, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. That morning, she had been a prisoner facing a life of servitude. Now she was free and safe, at least temporarily, thanks to the inexplicable generosity of a stranger, who was Quinn Reed. And why had he gone to such lengths to help her? After washing up and changing into the one spare dress from her small traveling bag, which Quinn had retrieved from the saloon, Nora felt restored enough to join the men for supper. The meal was simple but delicious venison stew with fresh baked bread. Over dinner, she learned more about Solace Creek Ranch. Quinn had bought it 7 years ago when it was little more than a run-down shack and a few dozen scrubby cattle. Through hard work and smart management, he'd built it into a modest but prosperous operation with over 300 head of cattle. What she didn't learn was much about Quinn himself. He skillfully deflected personal questions, keeping the conversation focused on the ranch or on Nora's life in Boston before her father's death. After dinner, Samuel and Miguel retired to their quarters in one of the outbuildings, leaving Nora and Quinn alone on the porch as darkness fell. The desert night was cool and clear, stars blazing in the black sky with an intensity Nora had never seen in the city. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Peaceful?" Quinn nodded. "That's why I named it Solace Creek. Found some peace here myself." "From what?" Nora asked before she could stop herself. Quinn was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "From a past I needed to leave behind. I'm sorry, I shouldn't pry. It's a natural question." He leaned against the porch railing. "I was a lawman for a while, U.S. Marshal. Saw too many things I wish I hadn't. Did some things I'm not proud of. Decided I'd rather raise cattle than chase men." Nora considered this new information. "Is that why you were watching Holloway, Old Habits?" A smile flickered across his face. "Something like that. He's been running schemes since before I hung up my badge. Using debt to control people, especially women, is one of his specialties." "Then I'm not the first you've helped." "No," Quinn admitted, "but most times all I can do is warn people before they get in too deep." "You were already caught in his web when I heard about you." "How did you hear?" "The saloon girl who helped clean you up this morning, Daisy. She sends word when Holloway's planning one of his auctions. I pay her to keep her eyes open. And you've done this before, paid off debts to free people. Quinn shook his head. Never that much money. Usually I can find some legal leverage against Holloway or his cronies, but with Blackwood involved, he frowned. He's dangerous in ways Holloway isn't. I couldn't risk you ending up in his hands. Nora shivered, remembering the cold eyes of the cattle baron. Thank you, she said again, the words wholly inadequate for what she felt. Quinn nodded once, then straightened up. It's getting late. You should rest. Tomorrow we can talk about what you want to do next. The next few days settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Nora, determined not to be merely a charity case, insisted on helping around the ranch. She took over much of the cooking and began putting the house in better order. Quinn hadn't lied when he'd said it was clean, but it was clear a woman's touch had been absent. Small comforts like properly arranged furniture, curtains that actually matched, and flowers on the table made the house feel more like a home. Quinn worked from dawn till dusk most days, but they shared meals together, and in the evenings they would often sit on the porch, talking. Gradually, Nora learned more about him. He'd grown up in Missouri, joined the Army young, fought briefly in the latter days of the Civil War, then became a lawman. He'd come to Arizona Territory 10 years ago and never left. In turn, she told him about her life in Boston, her work as a teacher, the modest but happy home she'd shared with her mother until her death, the shock of learning her father, who had abandoned them years earlier, had died in Tucson. I barely knew him, she admitted one evening. He left when I was 12. Mother rarely spoke of him. Yet you came all this way when you heard he'd died, Quinn observed. Nora sighed. Foolish, I suppose. Part of me hoped there might be something, some explanation, some apology, some small inheritance even. Instead, I found only debts and danger. And yet here you are, still standing, Quinn said with quiet admiration. Takes courage, or desperation, she countered with a small smile. As days turned to weeks, Nora found herself less concerned with planning her next move and more content with her present situation. Quinn was unfailingly respectful, the work was satisfying, and for the first time since her mother's death, she felt safe. She began to notice things about Quinn that had escaped her, initially the way his stern expressions softened when he thought no one was looking, his unexpected gentleness with animals, his dry sense of humor that emerged more frequently as they grew comfortable with each other. And sometimes, when their eyes met across the dinner table, or when their hands accidentally touched as they worked together, she felt a flutter in her chest that both excited and frightened her. 1 month after her arrival at Solace Creek, Nora was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Shading her eyes against the sun, she spotted 3 riders approaching and recognized with a jolt the lead rider as Nicholas Blackwood. She dropped the wet sheet she was holding and ran toward the corral where Quinn was working with a young horse. Quinn, she called, trying to keep her voice steady. Riders coming, it's Blackwood. Quinn's head snapped up, his expression instantly alert. He quickly secured the horse and moved to stand beside Nora, one hand instinctively going to the pistol at his hip. Get inside, he said quietly. No, Nora replied firmly. I won't hide. Quinn looked like he wanted to argue but simply nodded, his jaw tight as they watched the riders approach. Blackwood reined in his horse about 20 feet away, flanked by 2 men who were clearly hired guns. His cold eyes swept over the ranch before settling on Nora and Quinn. Reed, he called with false cheerfulness. Thought I'd pay a neighborly visit, see how your investment is working out. Not a good time for social calls, Blackwood, Quinn replied evenly. We're busy. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. I can see that, quite the domestic scene. His gaze lingered on Nora. Miss Jenkins, you're looking well. Ranch life suits you. Nora said nothing, fighting the urge to step behind Quinn. What do you want? Quinn asked bluntly. Blackwood dismounted, ignoring Quinn's tone. Just curious about your sudden interest in Holloway's business ventures. You've been a thorn in his side for years, but usually you're more subtle. Didn't see the need for subtlety in this case. $1,500 is a lot of money to spend on principle, Blackwood observed, walking closer. especially for a small rancher like yourself. My finances aren't your concern. Blackwood stopped a few feet away. They become my concern when you interfere with my business. I wanted that contract. You lost fair and square, Quinn said coldly. Now state your real purpose or leave. Something dangerous flashed in Blackwood's eyes. Very well, I'm here to make you an offer. $3,000 for Miss Jenkins' contract. There's no contract, Quinn replied. I tore it up the moment we left Tucson. Blackwood laughed. How noble. Then consider it an offer to the lady herself. He turned to Nora. $3,000, Miss Jenkins. Start a new life anywhere you please. All you have to do is accompany me back to my ranch for a brief visit first. Nora felt sick. I'm not for sale, Mr. Blackwood. Not to you, not to anyone. Everyone has a price, Blackwood insisted. $5,000 then. Quinn stepped forward, placing himself between Nora and Blackwood. The lady said no. It's time for you to leave. For a tense moment, Blackwood didn't move. His hired guns shifted in their saddles, hands hovering near their weapons. Then, abruptly, Blackwood smiled. Of course. My apologies for the intrusion. He mounted his horse in one smooth motion. But remember, Reed, you've made an enemy today, and I'm not as easily thwarted as Holloway. With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, his men following close behind. Quinn watched until they were out of sight before turning to Nora. Are you all right? She nodded, though her heart was racing. Why would he come all this way just to make that offer? He must know I'd refuse. Quinn's expression was grim. It wasn't about the offer, it was about sending a message. Showing he could find us, threatening what we have here. What do we do now? We be careful, Quinn said simply. Blackwood's dangerous, but he's also calculating. He won't make a move unless he thinks he can get away with it. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. Blackwood's visit had shattered the sense of security she'd begun to feel at Solace Creek. Worse, it had forced her to confront the reality of her situation. She couldn't stay here indefinitely, living on Quinn's charity, potentially putting him in danger. By morning, she'd made a decision. She found Quinn at the breakfast table and sat across from him, hands folded in determination. I need to leave, she said without preamble. It's not safe for you as long as I'm here. Quinn looked up sharply. Blackwood doesn't scare me, he should. Men like that don't make idle threats. She took a deep breath. You've done more than enough for me already. I can't ask you to risk your ranch, your life, by continuing to protect me. You're not asking, I'm offering. Quinn's voice was firm. Where would you even go? I thought perhaps California. I could find work as a teacher there, start fresh where Holloway and Blackwood have no influence. Quinn was silent for a long moment. Is that what you want, to leave? The question caught her off guard. Was it what she wanted? The answer came with surprising clarity. No, it wasn't. What she wanted was to stay at Solace Creek with its peaceful days and star-filled nights. With Quinn, what I want doesn't matter, she said finally. What's sensible does. I disagree. Quinn stood and moved to the window, staring out at his land. What we want matters a great deal. It's why I bought this ranch, why I left my badge behind, why I paid $1,500 to free a woman I'd just met. He turned to face her, something vulnerable in his expression that she'd never seen before. I didn't just do it because it was right, Nora. I did it because something about you. I couldn't bear to see you in chains, couldn't bear the thought of you in Blackwood's hands. Nora's breath caught. Quinn, I'm not good with words, he continued, moving closer. Never have been, but these weeks with you here. They've been the best of my life. The house feels like a home again. I feel like maybe I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I'm not asking you to stay out of obligation. If California is truly what you want, I'll take you to the stage myself. But if there's any chance that what you want is here with the ranch with me, then stay, please. Nora looked into his eyes, seeing the hope and fear there, so at odds with his usual confidence. In that moment, she knew her own heart with absolute clarity. I want to stay, she whispered. I've felt more at home here in weeks than I did in years in Boston, and you're unlike any man I've ever known. Quinn's face lit with a smile that transformed him. Then stay. We'll face Blackwood or anyone else together. He reached up, gently touching her cheek. "May I kiss you, Nora Jenkins?" In answer, she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the weeks of unspoken feelings between them. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you tore up that contract," Nora admitted. Quinn smiled. "I think I fell the moment you stood in that pen, chin up, demanding to bargain for your freedom instead of begging for mercy." Over the weeks that followed, their relationship blossomed from friendship into love. Quinn taught Nora to ride properly and to shoot, just in case, he insisted. She brought music back into the house, playing the old piano in the sitting room that had sat silent for years. 3 months after Blackwood's visit, with no further threats materializing, Quinn asked Nora to marry him. They were married by the local circuit preacher in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Samuel and Miguel as witnesses. "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness," Nora told Quinn that night as they lay together in what was now their bedroom, "especially not after everything that happened in Tucson." "Sometimes the worst days lead us to the best ones," Quinn said, holding her close. "If Holloway hadn't tried to sell you, we'd never have met." "That's a rather optimistic way of looking at it," she teased. "I'm becoming an optimist in my old age," he replied with a smile. "You're a good influence." Life at Solace Creek settled into a new rhythm. Quinn expanded the ranch operations, buying additional cattle and hiring 2 more hands. Nora started a small school for the children of neighboring ranchers, teaching 3 days a week in a converted storage building. They remained vigilant about Blackwood, but as months passed without incident, the immediate fear receded. They heard through town gossip that he'd had legal troubles of his own, allegations of rustling and water rights violations that kept him occupied with the territorial authorities. Holloway, they learned, had left Tucson altogether after a scheme involving land deeds backfired spectacularly. The last anyone heard, he'd headed to New Mexico territory to try his luck there. A year after their wedding, Nora discovered she was expecting a child. Quinn's joy was boundless, though tempered with concern for her well-being. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Women have babies on the frontier every day." "Not my woman, not my baby," he replied, his protectiveness making her smile. 7 months later, their daughter Elizabeth was born, with Quinn pacing anxiously outside while the doctor's wife assisted with the delivery. When he was finally allowed in to see them, the look of wonder on his face as he held his daughter for the first time brought tears to Nora's eyes. "She's perfect," he whispered, "just like her mother." As Elizabeth grew, Solace Creek Ranch flourished. Quinn's careful management and Nora's additional income from teaching allowed them to improve the property, adding on to the house and building a proper schoolroom. When Elizabeth was 3, Quinn received an unexpected letter from a lawyer in Tucson. An old acquaintance, a former saloon girl named Daisy, had died and left them a substantial sum of money. "She must have invested the payments I gave her for information," Quinn said, amazed at the amount. "Says here she never forgot how we helped several women escape Holloway's schemes." "What will we do with it?" Nora asked. Quinn considered for a moment. "I think Daisy would approve if we used it to help others, maybe a fund for women in difficult circumstances. To help them get a fresh start without having to bargain away their freedom," Nora smiled, loving him all the more for the suggestion. "The Daisy Jenkins Reed Foundation. It has a nice ring to it." By the time Elizabeth was 5, she had a little brother, Samuel Quinn Reed, named for Quinn's faithful ranch hand who had become like family. The ranch had grown to be one of the most successful in the territory, and their school had expanded to include a proper teacher's residence for the young woman who had taken over most of the teaching duties, as Nora focused on her family and the foundation. On their 6th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Nora for a ride to the top of the ridge overlooking their property. The ranch sprawled below them, green and thriving despite the harsh desert environment. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked, his arm around her waist as they gazed at their home. "That day in Tucson, did you ever think this would be your life?" Nora leaned against him, remembering the desperate woman in chains she had been. "Never. I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." Quinn turned her to face him, his eyes still filled with the same tenderness she'd first glimpsed that night behind the saloon. "You know, I never told you the real reason I was in Tucson that day." "Oh," Nora raised an eyebrow, curious. "I was planning to sell the ranch, move on." "I'd been restless, unsatisfied, thought maybe I needed a change," he smiled. "Instead, I found you, and everything changed without me having to go anywhere." "So I saved you too," she said softly. "Every day," he agreed, kissing her gently. "Every single day." As the sun set behind them, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a prisoner with nothing to a woman with everything she could ever want: a loving husband, beautiful children, purpose, and above all, freedom. Not just the freedom Quinn had bought for her that day in Tucson, but the freedom to love and be loved, to build something lasting in this wild, beautiful land. Sometimes, she thought, the darkest moments truly did lead to the brightest dawns. And sometimes, a cowboy finding a woman trying to bargain with her freedom was exactly where the best love stories began.